Hey friends, welcome back to a new video. Today I actually have my first guest on my channel. A really exciting interview with Michael Modica. He's a finance coach. He earned his bachelor's degree at West Point Military Academy and then went on to get his MBA at Harvard. He's such a fun and knowledgeable guy, and I'm so excited for you to meet him. So hi Mike, thank you so much for joining me on my channel. It was such a pleasure to get to know you and talk to you last time, to pick your brains. So I'm really excited for today's discussion as well.
Oh, likewise, Sylvia. I was extraordinarily lucky. I just went onto YouTube and said, let me find some young people who know a lot about personal finance, and there you were. So I'm delighted to join you this morning, and thank you for having me.
So I know that you ran the marathon 3 times, which is pretty impressive. So I was wondering whether you were athletically active all throughout your childhood, throughout college, starting at Harvard. How was that for you?
Yes. Prior to Harvard, I volunteered when I was 17 years old to join the United States Army via West Point. Most people in the world have heard of it. It's where the Army trains people to become the lieutenants and junior officers, and the number of famous graduates is quite long, and that school of course has a physical fitness requirement, and they do teach their lifetime fitness. So I've been, okay, I'm not a great athlete, but I tried to remember what they taught me. But that's really it. It's an excellent habit. I encourage anyone to, at any age, to start. But that's my backstory on it. Just a habit, and never lost it.
So something that I would say you and I have in common is that we like to give back or to help people. And I know that you volunteer at Erase PTSD, where you help people that are suffering from this disorder. And you're also currently a financial coach, not necessarily with any product to sell, but just to help people, help the younger generation that are often pretty quickly already in financial trouble. And I liked how you said that you wanted to kind of pass on your gray hair. I do think that you have a lot of knowledge to pass on.
Did it come? Gray
hair too. How did it come to that? How did you come to wanting to help people financially?
Oh, excellent question. Largely through my own family. My nieces and nephews are now in their late 20s, early 30s. And, I've known them literally since I was there most of the days they were born. Held them from literally the day they were born until now. And, I'm 63 years of age, and you're considerably younger, but I'll tell you what, you're going to snap your fingers or blink your eyes and you're going to be my age. And it's amazing when I look at my nieces and nephews to think that they were once children. They're not anymore. And I've always taken being an uncle seriously. And I think it's the role in a good family structure for an uncle, for the older people to, pass on and mentor to the younger people. And, it had just occurred to me, suddenly I was getting questions, Uncle Mike this, Uncle Mike that. And some of them had to do with money. I'm about to take a new job. What can you tell me about that? What's this 401k stuff? What can you tell me about that? And I was coming to realize that just because I happen myself to know a lot about something doesn't mean that other people do. 16 years of school, and never once, at least in the United States, is personal financial topics taught in any academic way. And it's a shame, but it's true. So I found that I was able to be extraordinarily helpful with very little input. My approach is very, very basic. I'm not inventing anything new, and the younger people just love it because, I speak to them plainly and tell them what it's going to take to be successful. I'm 63 now. I stopped working for a W-2 12 years ago. So it's given me a freedom to enjoy my life. We're all only going to be here for so long. So to my way of thinking, the longer one can be completely free to do what one wants, the better off one is. Now that's speaking just for me. Other people want to continue to show up to a regular job every day because that's their routine. That's fine. I want people to have the same freedom that I've had, and it's accessible really to almost anybody who makes decent money. You don't even have to be very, very highly paid person. I gave good advice to young people, and it's working for them. And it occurred to me that, well, I probably should offer this to a wider audience beyond the very small circle of people who just happen to be my blood relations and their friends. When you're my age and you have time, you know, you have to fill the time productively. I'm not one to know what's going on Survivor. I'm not a big TV watcher, you know, and I'm always busy. Just because I've stopped working for W2 doesn't mean I've stopped working, but it's given me the freedom to pursue things that I think are important, things that will, that are bigger than myself. And hopefully, you know, once I'm gone, once my time on this planet is done, that this planet will have been a little better off for the fact that I lived here. That's it. There's really no more, sounds very philosophical, but it's also very basic.
I think that's something that we all aspire to in some sense, to leave some sort of, not necessarily legacy, but just to leave a positive imprint.
I couldn't agree more.
You were so kind as to give us the space today to let us ask you some questions. So I have actually gathered quite a few questions from my viewers and my subscribers.
Oh, good, good.
They had interesting things to ask you. So we're just going to jump right in and start with the first question. We're going to start out a little more basic, a little easier. So I think a lot of us are trying to build wealth by especially saving money. But what is something you would advise someone in their early 20s how to save money?
Great question. If I say nothing else and somebody takes nothing else away from this video, in their early 20s, my advice is pay yourself first. It's only 3 words, but I would say most people have the tendency to do just the opposite. They get their paycheck or whatever form of income they've got, and they just start spending it. If you watch nature, for example, in my part of the world, there are lots of squirrels. And even a squirrel knows that winter's coming, and the squirrel will collect some nuts and put some away for the winter. Okay, so that's what young people need to do, and use round numbers to make it simple. The number might be a little high, but they're bringing home $1,000 a week. Okay, the best thing they can do is not pretend, but actually live on $850 to $900 per week. And the difference between the two, that 10 or 15% gets socked away the way the squirrel puts away the nuts for the winter, except young people, you're putting away the nuts for the winter of your life. When you're coming up to my age, when you just want to relax, you want to pursue other things, you're becoming less physically able, but you want to enjoy your golden years and so forth. So it's just a longer, instead of looking at it as like the squirrels do as one season, you're looking at your life as a season. So if you start to put the nuts away early, then you have the power of compound interest on your side. And so you just find a way. It's very difficult, and people will say, oh, that means I can't have this or I can't have that. Well, maybe you can't right now, but there are creative ways, many of which are, by the way, outlined on your channel for people to figure out how to live on 85 or 90 cents on the dollar. You can do it, no matter what your level of income is. So that would be my number one piece of advice to anybody, but particularly for young people, because time is on your side and it's such a powerful multiplier of wealth if you just start early. So you have to pay yourself first. The other piece of advice for young people, I would have probably the second thing that comes right to mind, is to really avoid the money traps. Now, most of your audience probably is in capitalist countries, United States, Europe, places like that, where there's free speech, and it's fine. Merchants are able to speak, and what merchants are trying to do is trying to take your money. So you really, as a young person, you have to really need to avoid going into debt, if at all possible. Now, there are legitimate uses of debt, which perhaps we'll discuss later, but that's my second tip, is do not, please, I'm begging you, do not start running up charge card debt in particular, which is extraordinarily expensive. Pay yourself first and don't go into debt. Those are number one and number two.
I guess what we can also take away from this is that delayed gratification is something that's really hard for a lot of us, or most of us, I would say. It's something we do have to learn, that we should be looking out for ourselves financially in the future when we're older.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been, some psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever. I certainly have read many studies which they've taken toddlers. And you probably are, I don't know if you've heard of the 1 marshmallow, 2 marshmallow test. And it's very revelatory. And my own son, unfortunately, failed the test. And back then, and he's kind of hardwired that way. But the test, very simply, is a psychiatrist will sit the little kid down in a room and say, okay, Johnny or Jane, here's a marshmallow. Now, if I come back in 15 minutes and that marshmallow is still there, I'm going to give you another marshmallow. And then little kids, of course, their attention span and so forth, they're just sitting there in a sensory deprived environment in a closed room with no books, no entertainment, no iPhone, no nothing. And they're just looking at this marshmallow. Well, can they wait 15 minutes, which for a toddler is an eternity? It turns out that those who can wait 15 minutes and end up with the second marshmallow will do better in life, generally speaking. Now, it's such a generalization, but that's the lesson. So delaying gratification is essential, and it's clearly something that you've got a handle on. My guess is it's hardwired into you, but people can learn, people can adapt. If it's not hardwired into somebody, well, that just means you have to try a little harder,
So what about later in life? So what advice would you give for people when it comes to saving up for retirement, especially in the US?
Okay. Well, in the United States, there are a few different tools that the government, it's really in the interest of the government and in society as a whole for people to fund their own retirement. That's an important concept. In the United States, one of the outcomes of the Great Depression was the institution of the Social Security system, which originally was intended, and still is, by the way, the government has not changed their view of this, was intended as a supplement to retirement. So the Social Security system was set up to provide a guaranteed income to seniors past a certain age, and it's changed a little bit over the years. But in a nutshell, what it does is it's what's known as a pay-as-you-go system, which means that the wages of people who are still working are garnished in order to pay older people in retirement. Everybody, by the way, gets Social Security in the United States. Bill Gates gets a Social Security check. Warren Buffett gets one because they paid into the system. So a couple things about Social Security that are very important. You can count on it as part of your retirement. However, the very, very important thing about Social Security, once you die, your Social Security benefit dies with you. So I'm saying is Social Security should be viewed as an extra. So in my view, in the conservative way of looking at things, and I encourage people, forget about Social Security. If you get it, it's gravy. The other ways then that the government wants people to save for their own retirement, they do that via tax incentive. And three primary ways in the United States. There's two forms of what they call individual retirement accounts. You'll hear them referred to as IRAs or IRAs. There is the type that, and both have this in common. Under age 50, one's allowed to contribute $6,000 per year. At 50 and later, up it to $7,000 a year to make it a little easier as you approach retirement to accumulate more money. And the conventional IRA, you're allowed to contribute to it before income taxes are levied from it. So if you're a W-2 employee, you could just have so much amount taken out of your check, or you could just pay it once a year, the $6,000, and it will grow tax-free the whole time, which is the huge benefit of it. The drawback to the conventional IRA is because the money never was taxed. When you begin to withdraw it in retirement, then the government views it as income as if you were working. So it's taxable. Okay, the other one is called a Roth IRA. They're very, very similar to a regular IRA, except you're contributing after tax money initially. Then it grows tax-free. And because the tax was paid on it before it was put into the account, you do not owe tax when it comes out. You can have both. Conventional IRA and a Roth IRA. And it gets a little complicated, but It's all on the internet. You could research it, or if anybody has any questions, they can contact me. You can even, there are people who switch them. Also in the United States, being a federal type of system, some states have income taxes, some don't. So you get somebody who moves from a high tax state to a no tax state, is a good time to convert IRA perhaps. There's all kinds of tactics, and separate from the IRA, there's also the world of employer funded plans, which are named after a section of the IRS code called 401k. That's where it comes from. And that's one where if you're employed and your employer offers a retirement plan, the employer will often match, or at least some, or a partial match at least, of the money that the employee puts in. That is one of the very few free lunches in the world. So anyone who's working for an employer who offers a partial 401k match, so the employee saves $5,000 and the company will match up to a third, well, that's $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, $1,800 of absolutely free money. Free, period. It's just part of your compensation. So that's something else to encourage. And as people get older, and this is important, because people change jobs, and in the United States, it's very common now these days for both spouses to work. So by the time someone is in their mid to late 50s, they might have, between the two, husband and wife, and maybe they were second wives or second husbands to each other. You know, it gets pretty complicated after a while. I had a phone call the other day from a friend who, their friend said, you know, we were looking at all our IRAs, 401ks, and between the two of us, they had 9 of them. And they had no idea among the 9, because they're not really terribly sophisticated, how if you put all the eggs from all those 9 little baskets into one basket, well, what are they invested in? They didn't even know. So it can get fairly complicated, but it's also very, very powerful, particularly for young people, because you have the power of compound interest on your side. So the answers are Social Security will be there for you. And then there are 3 ways that the government wants you to save for your retirement, and they offer you some tax breaks in doing so. Conventional IRA, Roth IRA, and employer provided 401.
And definitely something you would encourage people to invest into, those government, not funded, but kind of set up.
Absolutely. IRA is available to every adult. If you miss a year, there's no catching up. That $6,000 a year limit, if you forgot a year, it doesn't go to $12,000 the next year. So again, discipline and being regular and intentional is a word I haven't used yet, but it's an important word in the world of personal finances. You need to be intentional about your plan. And that's one that you do not want to miss. Really stick it very high on your list. The part of the pay yourself first thing, same thing. Max out your IRA contribution. Now, not everybody can afford to save $6,000 a year. Whatever it is you can afford to save is what you should be putting aside.
Mm-hmm. So before we talked about how it's not a good idea to rack up debt, is there a time or place where borrowing money or going into debt is okay?
Debt is a tool, much like a knife. A knife is a tool. Now, a tool is neither good nor bad. It depends upon how the tool is used. If you use your knife to cut butter, or in your wonderful recipes, for example, I'm sure you have quite a collection of knives. You are also, I'm sure, well aware that that knife is also a deadly weapon. So it's a tool, depends upon how it's used. The good uses for the debt tool are limited, but there are some. One is if you want to acquire real estate. Typically, most folks can't just, depending upon a part of the country and so forth, housing prices vary tremendously, but most younger people can't show up with $800,000 or $1 million and buy their home in cash. It just doesn't work that way. So in that case, they will take a form of debt known as a mortgage, and they'll come up with a down payment and a payment schedule and the like. So that use of debt is legitimate if you want to put a roof over your head and you don't want to rent that roof. So that's one. Another form of debt that is the legitimate use of debt is if you can earn a greater return on the money than what the money is going to cost you. As long as the debt, the capital is being used for a productive purpose that will return much higher than the interest rate being charged, then it's a wonderful tool. And the financial fancy term for that is leverage. So in those two instances, their debt is good. Where debt is bad, and it's the part where the knife becomes a weapon, is if people go into debt to acquire an asset that depreciates. Okay, so probably the most common way people go into debt for an asset that depreciates is an automobile. Okay, so my advice to anybody, I don't care what their age is to avoid car loans. Let's take a typical new car of $30,000 in the United States, average nice car. The moment that car drives off the lot, it's lost 20% of its value because now it's a used car. Typically after about 3 years, the car is now worth, if it's well maintained, these are average numbers, probably worth 18,000. And so you've turned 30,000 into 18 plus interest. You don't need to be a Harvard MBA or anything else to realize that's not a good investment. So the best way, while we're on the subject of transportation, is that something where possible you want to pay cash. You want to catch it at just the right point in its depreciation. Typically, as I mentioned, your $30,000 car is worth $18,000 after 3 years. Most lease turn-ins will have a limitation on the mileage of, say, 36,000. We'll say 30,000, just keep the numbers simple. And most well-maintained cars today are good for 150 to 180,000 miles. So very simply, if you can pay 60 or 70 cents on a dollar and have 80% of the useful life of the item left in it, well, that's a great deal. Now, nothing is free. What you're going to give up in exchange for that, cars are often associated with prestige. People want to be seen driving a BMW or a Mercedes because then neighbors will think that they're rich. And the car companies will make that as easy as they can, by leasing you a new car every 3 years. That's the most expensive way to buy a car. So again, and it's consistent with your kind of minimalist philosophy, is, if showing off for a car is super important for you, I'm not going to dictate to you what's important in your life. Anybody can free to pursue whatever they want. Just understand the cost of doing so. Myself, I drive, beat up Toyota RAV4 with dents. Why? Because I drive around New York City. And, you see these gorgeous Porsches and BMWs driving around the city with dents all in them from the traffic. And I think to myself, oh my God, these people are crazy. But they're looking at me and saying, oh, look at this guy. It looks like he doesn't have two nickels to rub together. Well, that's one of my secret little pleasures that people don't know, that I've been retired for a long time, because you wouldn't tell that from the wrapper of them driving around. They're not important to me. So don't use debt to buy things that depreciate in value.
Mm-hmm. I guess also a lot of times debt, if we're not financial literate, is also seen as this sometimes demonized monster, and you're supposed to be scared of it. But if you actually understand, as you said, that it's a tool, then you can really also leverage it.
Yes, particularly for young people, and I understand you're interested in doing this yourself, is establishing multiple streams of income. If you have an income besides your job, a traditional way for go-getters and people who are very concerned about their own financial future is to acquire a piece of rental real estate. In effect, if you do it right, the tenant ends up paying your mortgage. And then when that mortgage is paid off, well, the tenant was very kind enough to have bought that property for you. And that's a wonderful use of debt. But the numbers have to work. And you have to be very, very disciplined about it. But if you do, I mean, there are many, many, many ways to get wealthy. Debt is bad or debt is good. It's just like a knife. It's good or bad. It's all in how it's used.
If any of you watching have any additional questions or follow-up questions that you'd like to ask Mike, then be sure to head on over to his website. I'll leave the link down below. You can schedule a free and no strings attached Zoom call with him. That's how I got to know Mike. And it's always so much fun and so interesting and eye-opening talking to you. Also, if you'd like to download Mike's free ebook, it's called Top 5 Money Traps and How to Avoid Them. You can do that on his website as well. So Mike and I had a really long, really interesting talk, and I really don't want to cut out any of the valuable information. So I split this video into 2 parts. So you'll be seeing part 2 of this video with even more amazing information that he's provided us very soon. So stick around and subscribe for part 2.